table to welcome Dominic Alexander.
Right. So there have been uncountable numbers of books about revolution, so I should start by apologizing for adding to the pile. But most of these are concerned with minimizing the significance of revolutions. Either they happen for accidental or rather trivial reasons, and their outcomes would have just happened anyway without these distressing events. Or if you can't argue that and you have to admit their significance, then they were driven by the genius or the stupidity of the men in charge at the top. Absent any of those strategies, the thing to do is to say, well, yeah, I mean, sometimes, unbalanced and excitable people over there have revolutions, but we here, we don't need to do that sort of thing. So that's the strategy of the great doyen of liberal historiography, G.M. Trevelyan in the early 20th century, who said that because England had a old representative institution in the House of Commons, and townspeople and farmers just weren't that respected at the time, this is why the English Civil War was not a class war. And moreover, he went on to say that by the 1780s, therefore, the English could not understand what in the world the French Revolution was all about. And he is in complete line with the attitude towards the French Revolution of the establishment in the 1790s, which, of course, contrasted the placid prosperity of Britain, presiding over its wealth, not unsignificantly derived from slave-produced produce over there, with the horrendous violence of the French Revolution, in which the misogyny there of the depiction of the kind of Medusa figure representing the French revolutionary crowd. The misogyny there is not incidental to the propaganda purpose of it. Okay, so this is the kind of attitudes that you get towards revolutions and how they happened. So historians are mostly loath to admit that that revolutions are massively consequential and that they are driven by profound social causes and indeed by the actions of ordinary people, women and men, those very people who are supposed to be of little importance, let alone power. But the events of the Great Revolution show how collectively people did indeed have a great deal of power and importance. So the first question to tidy away is, what were the great revolutions as opposed to any others? You can have changes of rulers, changes of whole political systems, without that actually pushing aside the existing ruling class. The ruling class stays the same in many ordinary political revolutions, but the great revolutions are the exception, where not only did you change the political system or the set of personnel in charge of the state, but a whole new ruling class comes in its place. And the English Revolution of the 17th century was one of the first of these great revolutions in that time as part of a longer process of the change of mode of production, the change of the whole organization of society, in this case from feudalism to capitalism. Before the English Revolution, the word revolution, when particularly applied to political events, understood it simply as a cycle, as things moving around in an endless wheel back to the beginning again. And it was the English Revolution that actually gave us the modern definition of the word, meaning a fundamental transformation. So this is what was happening in England in the 17th century, is that it was moving from a basic agricultural and feudal society, hierarchically governed by lords and the church, to a market-orientated society in which profit drove how the economy works. And this process was increasingly dividing the old ruling class, the landowning class, the gentry, into interests which diverged from the monarchy in particular, and the aristocracy. So these changes were fundamentally undermining the ability of the aristocracy and the monarchy to rule in the old way, to rule through its control of lands, through its patronage systems and systems of clientage. And this engendered a financial crisis on the part of the crown, which Charles I in particular tried to rectify by setting up new systems of arbitrary taxation to assert the absolute primacy of the monarchy over against the differentiated interests of various groups of landowners, often the gentry. It was also he was also engaged in trying to re-establish the hierarchical authority of the church and its power over people's lives by asserting a more authoritarian form of Protestantism than was increasingly favored by many people. I mean, the church throughout the Middle Ages had been the one of the essential guarantors of the social order, of the social hierarchy, of obedience to the lords and so on. But increasingly, people wanted a say in religious affairs and turned to forms of religion that envisaged, in essentially a more democratic kind of religious organization. And this, of course, Charles I and the interests around him were determined to stop. But this means that what the state was beginning to slide into was a kind of polycrisis. It faced difficulties in the economic sphere and difficulties in the political sphere and difficulties in the religious sphere, all of which meshed together in crucial ways at various points. So it's the financial crisis that first forced Charles to call a new parliament in 1640 after a period of personal rule, which was an attempt to establish a kind of absolutist monarchy in Britain. The attempt failed. The system was breaking down of its own accord and increasingly facing resistance from local society, from the traditional leadership of the gentry, but often pushed from below by discontent from the peasantry, from artisans, from the middling sort of people who were emerging in the new social relations that were coming to be in England at the time. So Charles, whose many mistakes have often been seen as the cause of the English Civil War, and if only he had been less of an imbecile, maybe the revolution could be avoided. None of this had to happen. But he was caught in the horns of any number of dilemmas of the crisis of the British state at the time, and it would not be wholly anachronistic to say that in some ways his stupidity and his aggressiveness is kind of makes him a Trump of his time. In a way, he caught by crisis, which he couldn't find a way out of, he lashes out and commits all sorts of errors. But the errors are the produce of the crisis of the system, not of his deficient personality, as we see again today. So, however, the immediate reason why Charles had to summon a parliament and therefore face the organized opposition of factions of the ruling class was because of his war with Scotland, which was over religion. So again, it's the various forms of crises come together into a nexus that destabilizes and opens up the way for crisis to metastasize. And it's in needing money to fight the Scots that he has to face down opposition in Parliament. But again, this isn't coming purely from the ruling class. The ability of the sort of radical sections of the landowning class to dissent from Charles, to oppose the formation of an absolutist monarchy in Britain, was crucially pushed all along the way by the actions and mobilizations of ordinary people, particularly in London, but this was happening in the provinces as well. So MPs who were elected to first the short parliament and then the long parliament which succeeded it were often aware of pressures in their localities to take a strong oppositional line to the monarchy. So this is where the actions of ordinary people in particular come into play and start driving events. One of the first of the eruptions of mass action into the conflict between king and parliament was again over religion and the opposition of ordinary people to Charles's Archbishop Laud and his attempt at reforming the Church of England, again to strengthen its hierarchical nature, to strengthen its ability to interfere in the ordinary lives of people, which were increasingly resented and opposed by people who were forming illegal dissenting churches, called gathered churches, as they were, as it were, gathered from below by ordinary people, as opposed to hierarchically from above. So we have there's oddly precious few illustrations of the kind of mass involvement in the kind of great days of events in 1640 to 41. But this is the turnout of ordinary people to witness the execution of Charles's favourite and kind of chief minister, as it were, Strafford, which is one of the few illustrations that I can find of massive people coming out. But that's just by way of illustrating the kind of crowds of people mobilizing to put political pressure on events at the top. One of the, however, precipitating events was riots over the bishops and an attack on Lambeth Palace, the Archbishop's palace, in which the bishops had to flee from their courts, the church courts, which had enormous power again over ability to interfere over people's lives, and these were what people were rejecting. So in one case, a barrage of pillows actually forced the bishops to flee in fear of what the crowd might do if they graduated from pillows to something else. And following from that attack on Lambeth Palace, the crowds also forced open the jails and freed lots of prisoners. Now, the jails and freeing prisoners, it's not just freeing criminals sent there to prison for wrongdoing, it's largely debtors who were imprisoned for what they owe the state. So this is a very political act to free the prisoners, and it's an attack on political authority. So this is a part of a process in 1640 to 41 in which the authority of the king and his ministers in London dissolved under the impact of mass actions in particular, and of the increasing coordination between the crowds and the radical factions of MPs in the House of Commons. And there was clearly organisation happening on the ground amongst the crowds as well, even at the level of the first attack on Lambeth Palace. So all this came to a head in December 1641 when crowds surrounded the House of Lords and prevented the bishops from taking their seats. The bishops, of course, being some of the mainstay of support for the king in the Houses of Parliament. So the people preventing the bishops from taking their seats was intended to make sure that the king lost control of the House of Commons. And the events escalate from this point into the first clash between royalist and parliamentary supporters, and the king then tries to arrest the 5 MPs who he identified as being the kind of ringleaders of opposition. And this is one of the few sort of commemorative sort of paintings of historical events. You get many, many more such sort of representations of the French Revolution. The English Revolution is much more often sort of tidied away, and there's not so many quite so famous images. But there's King Charles trying to arrest the 5 members, who, of course, had already flown away into hiding places in the city, where they could be protected by the sympathizers of Parliament in the city and the city government, which again itself was pushed towards the side of Parliament by an invasion of the crowd, bolstering the pro-parliamentary side in the city council. But in a way, more than this kind of grandstanding of the great and the good here in a kind of semi-constitutional tableau, what happened in these days was the first clash between Charles's thugs, the kind of party of order, the Cavaliers as they were becoming to be known, led by one Thomas Ludford, who he tried to appoint as Master of the Tower and had to back down from it because of mass demonstrations against Ludford. And there's Ludford attacking the pro-parliamentary crowd there. That leaves the pro-parliamentary crowd looking rather passive and hunted by the aristocrats with his sword. But in fact, the parliamentary crowd was both sort of men and women and apprentices, and and sailors wielding clubs, and apprentices throwing tiles at the Cavaliers, and they gave as good as they got. And so it wasn't a victory for the parliamentary ruffians there. So much for the Cavaliers being sort of romantic with their flowery hats and so forth. They were a bunch of ruling class thugs, much like Pete Hegseth and his lot. This is how the English Revolution played out. It was mass actions which turned the tide at every moment, and organization built increasingly right from those early years until we get, of course, the emergence of the Levelers as an organized political tendency, which again pushed the parliamentary side at crucial moments into the final defeat of the royalist side. Now, also something about revolutions that's important to note is how rapidly people's ideas change in the course of them. So one of the figures who would become a Leveller leader, Richard Overton, before the emergence of the Levellers themselves in 1644, published a pamphlet called Man's Mortality, which was basically an atheist tract saying, the soul is not immortal, and therefore, challenging all the basis for the rule of the church and the social hierarchy based on the church thereby. Now, this would get you sent into to prison at the very least 10 years before this. But censorship had broken down as the bishops' courts had been attacked and dissolved and their authority destroyed. So the regime of censorship was gone, and now it was possible to print what was unthinkable only a few years before. So the revolution produces huge changes in consciousness, which happen very, very quickly. Now, I'm realizing I'm rapidly running out of time, but moving on to the French Revolution, just briefly, again, we have, there's many representations of the French Revolution which tend to concentrate on the kind of great moments in the leadership. So this is the Third Estate taking the tennis court oath because they were forced to leave their assembly that the king had to call again because of state finances breaking down in the French Revolution. And here the deputies of the Third Estate make their oath that they will not be moved on. They will stay in session until they settle a new constitution on France. But what enabled them to do this and what enabled them to take this stand against the monarchy was, again, the actions of the crowd. And here we have, in a sense, a better reflection of what the French Revolution was about, which was when the women of Paris marched out from Paris dragging whatever weapons, including cannons, they could lay their hands on, and marching to Versailles, the palace of the king, and basically taking the royal family hostage. And I mean, this was the moment when the power of the French monarchy broke down. And it was the actions not just of ordinary men, but of women. And again, is the great revolutions, the degree to which they see a huge change in the nature of society and upheaval from the very bottom is the way that women mobilize so prominently at such crucial moments. That happened in the English Revolution as well, but I mean, hence the attack on in the first slide on the Medusa carrying the head on the pole. That fear of those people who were supposed to be most obedient in society taking matters into their own hands and challenging power, here the women of Paris. Notably, you'll see that, I mean, there's some middle-class women in there, but they're mostly relatively poor women taking these actions. And again, in the French Revolution, again, organization of the crowd becomes incredibly important. So it's not just so spontaneous actions of the crowd, but the way they become organized into the political groups. So the Jacobin Club, the Cordeliers Club, and indeed there was a club of revolutionary women as well, in fact. And it's this organization which enabled the, in a sense, sharpened the power of the crowd and its ability to intervene at various points onto the radical side of the revolution. So this in a sense is, there's a kind of twofold lesson to bring out of this, is that the events of the great revolutions, which I hope to show in the book, are driven by the actions of the mass of the people. Secondly, that what becomes increasingly important in these is the organization of the crowd, the degree to which crowds develop coherence and therefore are able to strategically intervene at key moments. But this is a difference between the bourgeois revolutions like the English and the French Revolution and the socialist or working class revolution. And of course the Russian Revolution is the third great revolution I cover in the book, is the crucial question of organization, because the bourgeois revolutions did not need the kind of pre-existing organization. The bourgeoisie was developing its own centers of power as capitalism developed in the interstices of society. So they already had influence. They already had centers of power. So in the English Revolution, in the city of London, but also those parts of the country that were most well developed tended to support the parliamentary side and pushed representatives in the House of Commons towards challenging the king. Similarly, in the French Revolution, the deputies of the Third Estate who took charge of the revolution, they were dominated by ideas of free trade, of bourgeois property, and so on. So it's their ideas and the capitalist model of social relations which drove how the revolution proceeded, and indeed how the revolution eventually in France clashed with the interests of the revolutionary crowds, and how it ultimately fell apart, and you got a dictator, Napoleon, rise up instead. Now, the Russian Revolution proceeded on a altogether different basis, different pattern in many ways, because it was the working class that was driving that revolution in its interests. And it was a century's worth of working class organization coming out of the French Revolution that informed the organization of Russian revolutionaries into their socialist parties, and of course the revolutionary party, the Bolshevik Party. And it was a revolutionary organization, but also a class organization in terms of the trade unions, which mobilized so much, and the new form of organization, the Soviets, the workers' councils, which actually began to take control of day-to-day life in Russian cities, first in 1905, and then much more generally in 1917. Now, the thing is that although you got these class organizations, you still needed the revolutionary organization to mobilize people in the right way and strategically at the right time. Because again, the class organizations their leadership tended to get captured by the more moderate elements who were desperate to settle things down and bring a conclusion to events. And it was only the existence of the Bolshevik Party, of a revolutionary organization rooted in class organizations and in the wider class, that was able to bring the potential of the revolution to a conclusion in Russia. So that's part of the story that I tried to tell there. Now, socialism isn't going to come about through evolution in the way that sometimes people imagine. Capitalism creates the conditions for socialism, because it increasingly socializes the world around us, despite the fact that it is based on competition and based on the interests of individual capitals fighting against each other. It creates massive interconnection across the world. It creates total interdependence of all of us upon each other, so that we are now dependent in one way or another upon collective organizations. But so long as these are controlled in the interests of profit, in the interests of the individual capitalists, we will remain exploited and oppressed. But it has the seeds there of turning the whole thing into its opposite, turning it inside out, and turning it into a society organized for collective benefit, not individual profit. But in order to arrive at that, what we do need to learn is the lessons of the great revolutions of the past, the capacity of mass action, and the importance of organization to bring that about, to bring the power of collective mass action to bear against our ruling class. Right.
Thank you so much.